Hi everyone, today we're gonna follow up with the fragments example. So if you remember last time, all we worked on was in creating fragments and adding them to an activity. So here we have our activity and it is made of two fragments that we created. One of them was created using the XML, which is the display fragment, and we had some code for it. And the other one was the input fragment, which we created dynamically by adding all of the different widgets and the layouts through the source code itself. So there's no XML layout for it. Now, what we want to do is to have, ultimately our app will have two fragments, the input fragment at the top and the view fragment or the display fragment at the bottom. So what we would want to do in this case or in this particular application is to have the user enter information into the input fragment and then have that information transferred and be viewed into the list fragment on the bottom. So we go to the emulator, we will add that whatever we enter here is added as a new element into the list view. Now, if you remember, the list view is actually linked to a particular array of pets in this case, which we created here. And then if we modify the content of this array, then we will be able to effectively update the list view with that information. Now, the problem is that fragments cannot communicate with each other directly, or it is not recommended that they do, just because they are likely to be replaced during runtime. So if you try to connect or directly to communicate with a fragment that doesn't exist, it's a sure way to get a null pointer exception or some other form of exception. Most commonly it will be a null pointer because it couldn't find the fragment. So what we're going to be covering today is how to do this transfer of data between fragments. Now this is also a way that you can transfer data between the fragments and the main activity that encompasses or contains those fragments. So what we're going to be doing is using the view model. Now for this view model, you're going to have to create a new class called pet view model, and it has to extend from the view model. Now the first thing that we want to do is say which is the data that this view model is going to handle or store. So in this case, we're going to have a private, and it's going to be a linked list of type pet. So this is just the same array that we're handling right now in the list view, but now we're going to be asking this particular view model to actually handle the data for us. That way the data is going to remain across different configuration changes and across different fragments. However, when you're dealing with a view model, you actually need to have something called a mutable live data, and then that one will be a wrapper for your data itself. Now, what this does is it makes sure that whenever data is updated, you have the option or the functionality to go into somewhere else that is looking at this data and make sure that those updates are properly handled. Now, once we have the live data, then we have, since it's made private for security reasons, then we have to override a method called set pets, and we have to override the method get pet list. So no, this is going to return the array. This is not what we want. It's yet. So for now, we want it to return a live data like the other one. Get pets. That's the one we want. So right now, as you can see, we don't need this one because we have the pets mutable live data. So the data that we're moving from the other fragment is going to be this one, but we're going to be wrapping it inside the pets variable. That is a mutable live data. Now this one, we're going to modify it just a little bit. First, we're going to get the pets. So for this one, we're going to be doing a couple things. Now, since we wanted to have some default data that we're loading into the other fragment, then we're going to be doing that if the list is empty. So if pets is null, means that it hasn't been initialized, which we haven't because we don't have a constructor. We only have get and set methods. We could also create a constructor, but when you're dealing with a view model, it's better just to deal with set and get methods. So here we're gonna say we're gonna create a pet list. So this is gonna be a local variable, just so we can actually add data. Pet list. We're gonna initialize it. Oh no, this is not the right one. We want to initialize the mutable live data. So we're gonna say new mutable live data and then the type of it, which is gonna be a linked list of pets. Okay, explicit can be replaced. And then we're gonna say to load the pets. So right now, this is where we're gonna be adding information into our mutable live data called pets. So for that one is where we need to create a linked list. And this is going to be the data itself. So I'm not gonna type all of this because I already have that inside of the display fragment. So all that we're gonna do we'll fix that part later. Basically, we'll replace it. Now here, this is not pets, this is the list that we're creating here. And then what we're gonna say is to make the pets live data, set the value of that particular wrapper or container to be the value that we have on this list. So we're effectively copying all of this information into a variable that will be handled by the view model in this get pets if it's empty. If it's not empty, then we're just gonna return the container or the value itself. Now we have a get. Now, since what we want to do is to add an element, we're gonna say, let's create a public void method add pet. So we want to create a method that allows us to add new data into this particular array. So for that one, all we have to do is get a linked list with the data that is contained inside of the wrapper. So for that one, we use the getValue method. So you say wrapper data dot get value, and that will give you the thing that is inside. In this case, our linked list. Then list dot add, and then we need a pet. So let's receive a parameter with the new pet to be added. And then let's update the wrapper by setting the value to be the updated list. Okay, that looks good. Now we have get pets. and we have the add pet, and we have set pets. Okay. So thus far, all that we've done is just create the live data. Over here, we have a set pets method. In this case, if we had some sort of mutable live data, we could use the setter method, but in our case, we're not loading up the information from anywhere else. We're just having it being loaded here if it's empty, and if it's not empty, then it will just be whatever is contained there, and then we just add onto it. So this is it for the view model. Now what we want to do is use that view model as the data container, and for that one, what we're going to be doing is using the main activity as the place where the data is going to be handled. So what we're basically saying is that since the activity is the root of all of the fragments that are going to be present in our application, or at least in the context, then this is where we can create the data. The view model, and this is going to be the view model. Okay, perfect. Now when we create our activity, we have to, if we had like an initializer or a way in which we're reading the data into this particular activity, then we will have to do something here like calling the set pets for loading data into the view model. Since we don't have that, then we can just leave it like this. Now our next step will be to initialize the view model. So as you can see here, we have a reference, but we haven't initialized it. So what we're going to be doing is get a global reference on the activity level for the view model. So the way we do this is by, let's call it shared view model, just to make it clear that we're sharing it with the other fragments. And then we say view model providers of, and then we say the context is this, and then we want to get a model provider for the pet view model. And this is a class reference, so you have to use dot class. And this line, basically what it's saying is, look if there is a value or an existing view model for this pet view model class and give it to me. If it doesn't exist, then it will create a new view model effectively. Once we have that, we can have a get method because it's a private variable. So let's make a public method that returns the view model. And then here you just return the shared view model. So now we have to go into our fragments themselves, and then we have to tell the fragments that our fragments are also going to be dealing with a pet view model. Model. And then what we want to do is on the activity created, because the view model will not exist until the activity is created, so we have to do the reference to get the pointer to this particular reference to the view model that is being shared by the activity. We have to actually call the method after the activity onCreate has been successfully made. Otherwise, we will not be able to get a pointer because it doesn't exist in memory. don't see an activity created. Okay, there it is, an activity created. Okay, so we call this upper, and then we just initialize our ViewModel the same way we did as before. So ViewModels, and then we tell them, hey, our context is going to be the activity that I belong to. And then get me a pet ViewModel with this context. So effectively what we're saying is get me a pet ViewModel that exists for the context of the activity that I'm a part of. So since the context of the activity already has this pet ViewModel, then it will return a reference to this one. So you will effectively be accessing the data from the main activity. Now we're gonna be doing the same thing for the display fragment because we want to have both of these things share the same data. So we're going to initialize it the same way. I think the name of this one is that. Okay. And then copy this method. There is no difference between any of those two methods right now because all that we're doing is just getting the reference to the attribute of the view model. Now, when we're coming to input fragment and display fragment, there's gonna be differences on how we actually access this data. So the way this works is you're gonna get the value from the pets view model. So you're just gonna say, oh, give me the value of this one. But what we want to have is to have that happen automatically whenever the view model changes. So for that one, we're gonna use something called the observe method, which effectively says, look at my view model, look at the data that I have there. So this should be a mutable live data, and observe if there is going to be any change. So what we're going to be doing is get the lifecycle view owner, and then we're going to create an observer. So this is going to be an observer. So what we're doing, if you're not familiar with the observer pattern, is we're creating an object that is going to be listening to changes in the data. All of this is done in the background by Android Studio on the view model. And every time that there's an update, it's going to be calling this method, the onChange method. So what happens if the list of pets change? Well, we want to do what we did here. Set the adapter of our list view. View. Okay, we have the references at lower levels, so I'll leave it there. Already defined in the scope. Okay, where is it? Oh, okay, that's the linked list I'm getting here. I don't need to make it a new one. All I need to do is use it on the adapter. So here we have the same adapter we had before, and then we're using the pets that comes from here on the onChanged. Okay, and then we're using the adapter. There's nothing else we need to change there. So effectively, every time this linked list that is being observed on the mutable live data changes, we're going to get the data that changed, which will going to give us the updated data, and then we can just set it to the adapter. Now let's go to the input fragment, which is going to be slightly different because we are not going to be doing anything here. We're just going to be doing something in our onClick listener. So on our onClick listener, all we have right now is these three elements. So the next thing we want to do is create a pet out of it. Well, we'll just call the constructor. There's a name, break, and age. And then we say, okay, ViewModel, do me a favor, and add P to the data. So that's all we have to do there. So now let's run our application. And once we have that, we should be able to see the changes. Okay, so right now we have our default data. Now, I know it looks the same as before, but the difference is that right now, we're no longer doing that data inside of the display fragment. We're no longer doing it here on the on create view. We're now doing it on the pet view model get pets. So just notice that difference. And now let's create a new pet. So let me see. This doggy is called Sassy Yellow. He is Labradoodle, and he is 2 years old. Now let's click on that pet, and as you can see, the data is directly reflected here. Now, if we wanted to do something that transfers data to an activity, then we will do the same thing. Have the shared view model on the activity, and on the fragments themselves, you get a reference to that view model using the get activity as the context. So that's it for the sharing data between fragments. You can have more than one data here. So if you wanted to have an additional member data, such for instance, a string called app name, let's say this is the type of data you want to share, then what you want to do is have the string encompassed within a mutable live data, and then create the methods that allow you to get, add, set, whatever you need to do with that data, and then you can call those methods for that data and updating it within the fragments or the activities. So that's it for today. If you want to play more with this and just have a little bit more practice, do that, add additional member data inside of here. Maybe you want to do something like, instead of having the pet being passed directly, just create live data that stores the three elements, so name, breed, and age. And inside of the pet view model is where you will use that data to update the list rather than passing the pet directly. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day.